we're going to look at some examples when we have fractions as our coefficients. So before we do that, let's review how to multiply and divide fractions. Let's say we had the fraction 2/3 divided by 4/5. To divide this fraction, we keep the first one the same. We change from a division to multiplication, and then we take the reciprocal, which means we flip it upside down. So we always say keep, change, flip. And then once we have that into multiplication, we just multiply across the top. 2 times 5 is 10, over 3 times 4 is 12. So when we think about what we're doing when we are dividing fractions, we multiply by the reciprocal, or multiply by the flipped fraction. We're going to call it reciprocal. So looking back at our examples up here, if we remember what we have to do for inverse operations, 2/5 x means 2/5 times x, so we have to divide by 2/5. This looks really confusing. What this right here really says, it says 2/5 divided by 2/5. Well, we just said that to divide fractions, we keep, change, and multiply by the reciprocal. So what we're going to do is, instead of writing fractions out like this where it's a little bit hard to understand, we're instead going to skip the steps in between and just do that last step where we're multiplying by the reciprocal. So if I see a fraction, I need to divide, what we're going to do is we're going to multiply by the reciprocal instead. That's a shortcut for dividing fractions. And just like when we were doing it before, this will turn into 1. Technically be 10 over 10, and 10 over 10 just is 1x, which is x is less than. And then if I multiply by 5 over 2 on the left, then I've got to multiply by 5 over 2 on the right. And we make 3 over 1, so I can work with fractions. 3 times 5 is 15. Over 1 times 2 is 2. And you can always divide and turn that into a decimal. In this case, that is exactly 7.5. If you have a decimal that repeats, then I would suggest leaving it as a fraction so you have an exact answer. So let's use the same thing here. So I know I need to divide by 3/4, but we can use our inverse operations. And divide by 3/4 is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So 4 over 3. On both sides, 4 over 3. Making this a fraction. This is going to turn into 1x, or just x. And then 2 times 4 is 8. 1 times 3 is 3. So again, when we have fraction coefficients, we want to multiply by the reciprocal. And that means you flip the fraction. That's what reciprocal means. It might be helpful to add that to your notes so that you have that to remember when it comes time for a mastery check or assessment.